Now, in this book, because it's a prequel, I had written about 30 first chapters, and none of them worked. It was so frustrating. And then when I got the idea that it was Ari Greene's book, I came up with the opening line.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Congratulations, that's very exciting.
Thanks.
Do you always do a little video for all
Yeah,
your?
the last two I have, and I'm going to do it from now on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm amazed you didn't pull out your New Yorker rejection letter. Were you on pins and needles waiting for the New Yorker rejection letter? So you wrote this thing, it says in your author's note at the end, as you mentioned, 30 years ago, on a portable typewriter that you got as a present for...
My bar mitzvah. That's right. Actually, that's a lie. It was my brother Lawrence's present, and it was this leather-bound thing that you could pull open. I don't know. I really wish I still had it.
Yeah. We have a typewriter museum in our house. You're welcome to come and borrow any of them that you want. You did your research at a Toronto Public Library. Do you want to shout out the branch?
Yeah, the reference library. I would just spend days and days there. And, this was really before the internet. So I would just I would go down in the basement where they had the newspaper things. It was amazing. 1988, when you looked at the newspapers, there were these ads for this amazing new product. It was this big suitcase that a salesperson could use, and they could use it, and they could actually phone into the head office for about 10 minutes, Yeah. And there was this great debate about the free trade deal. And Canada was going to lose its identity. We were going to become the 51st state. Kind of resonates today. It was fascinating seeing all that stuff. It was great.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, for people who don't remember what research was like back then, like what you're actively like scrolling through microfiche?
Oh yeah, you have to go. The problem is you'd put the microfiche in, and then you spend 3 hours reading about something that had nothing to do with what you're researching. Because, that's in many ways the problem with the internet, because it's much too specific. That sense of roaming around and rumbling around wasn't there, but it really, and the great thing about looking at old newspapers, I don't want to sound pretentious, but as a writer, you have to kind of put yourself in that era. And it really put me there doing that.
Mm-hmm. No, I love the ads. I always feel like I'm amazed how into what I consider the future, there were ads for like, make him happy when he comes home in the evening with a cocktail. So why do you think that people didn't want the book the first time around? What was missing?
Well, there's a few things. First of all, and Johanna, you've been a writer your whole life. When you go home tonight, pull out something you wrote 30 years ago and read it like this.
Yeah, I don't keep the stuff I wrote 30 years ago.
I keep everything. Somewhere in that box, I'm sure there's that rejection letter. But I was terrified because I knew there were some things that were really, really flawed in the book. And but the interesting thing, I literally didn't want to read it till I had a few other people read it. But the bones, like the plot, was basically the same plot. I had another subplot that I took out, and some of the writing was so pretentious. It was really, really embarrassing. But what I've done, and I'll put this up on the website, is I've done a little vignettes about certain things. So that chapter that I mentioned about this small-town lawyer, I just always loved that chapter. And so when I picked up the book again and I reread that chapter, it was almost word for word what you'll now find in the book, page 109, I think it is. So what was really rewarding, sometimes I read stuff, I said, I wrote that? Well, that really works. It's like Bob Dylan said recently, he says, I can't even remember the guy who wrote those songs. But it was actually really fascinating to go back and see what I was doing then. And I made some really basic mistakes that I teach all my writing students not to do. So that was kind of, they just jumped out at you as things that just didn't work.
Tell us one basic mistake.
Well, this is going to be very technical, but I write in third person. So what you don't want to do when you're writing in third person is go to I. So, if Greene ran down the street and he thought, I really got to get there, it's the I that's actually a mistake. It's because you want to stay in that subjective thing. It's a very subtle thing, but it's a really big mistake. I'm very, very big on similes. I love similes. And some of the similes were real cliche, but then I was amazed that some of them really, really worked.
That work,
Yeah. I used a few terms about people from certain backgrounds that would be politically incorrect today. I kind of went, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, don't look at anything too closely from 1988.
Yeah. That's a great question. Thank you. Yeah.
It is so interesting, though. Like, as you said, you had this career in publishing, which is where we met, which is why I can't call him Robert. I have to call him Bobby.
Please call me Bobby.
Because we met in the 90s in magazine world. And then, you have this law career, and yet there's something in you that wants to be a writer. What do you think is, like, missing from the other parts of your career, or like, why this crazy compulsion that we all have?
Well, I've thought about that a lot. First of all, I grew up in a family of readers, and I was blessed by my, sorry, it's hard, my now late older brother, David.
Sorry, the book is dedicated to him.
Yeah, but David was this extraordinary, I have 3 brothers, and so they're all great, but he was this extraordinary force of nature. He went to Yale Drama School, he wrote 12 books, and he was kind of the creative one in the family.
Was it his typewriter you stole?
No, it was my oldest brother's typewriter. It took me a long time to realize being a lawyer, it's like being a doctor, or it's a reactive job. And I think I'm a very creative lawyer. I come up with, but people bring you their problems, and you have to recreate them. And being an editor was the best background, because I spent 10 years cutting, revising, ask my kids. But being a writer, and the cliche is the blank page, but it's not reactive, it's proactive. And you get the chance to kind of create something yourself. So, like, sometimes I'd go to a movie and I think, I could do a better movie than that. And so I think, and when I look back in that box, I see, like, when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, I was already writing stories. So I think you just have this compulsion to write stories. I'll be candid. I had no idea it would ever get published. And I'll tell you a little story. We had a cottage up north that I would go to every once in a while to write. And we had very little money. We were raising 3 kids. I had this beat-up old typewriter. Not computer. I made to a computer. It was an old used computer. And I remember the day I finished the novel. And you'll get a kick out of this. I put -30-, which, if you're a journalist, that's what you do when you finish the story. And I just had this sense of exhilaration. And I phoned this friend of mine who was a journalist. He was a writer. He was a top writer. And he said, Bobby, it's the greatest moment. Better than being on the New York Times bestseller list, better than all that stuff, the moment you've actually finished your first book. So this is kind of funny. So I took the floppy disk out, I put it on the kitchen table, and I wrote a note. Because remember, there was no internet or anything back then. And I wrote a note that said, if I die in a car accident on the way home, this is my book. So like now when I talk to young writers, and I just say, like, you have to finish the book. And I really never thought I would go back to it.
Well, now that you mentioned being a kid and being a reader and a writer, what kind of a kid were you? Like, what was your family dynamic? How did you? How much time did you spend writing and reading? What else did you do?
Well, my parents were. I mean, it's funny because people have, like, my father was a physician. My mother was a therapist, a psychologist, but we just had books. And what we would do, we would sit and read. And my mother was cursed with 4 boys, so I remember she really wanted me to read. So I remember she gave me, the first book she gave me was Gone with the Wind. Now, I was about 12, and I got the point where Scarlett O'Hara was trying to decide if she should wear this dress, whether it showed enough breast or not. Now, if I'd been 14, I would have been really interested. But I remember, it's interesting you asked me that. I remember she bought me a bolster. Do you know what a bolster is?
Oh, yeah, for your bed.
Yeah, and I would sit there and read and read. And I was thinking about that recently. The first book that I read and then I went back and reread right away was Catch-22.
It's so funny, if you have 4 rambunctious boys, make them read. I think that's, please sit down and be quiet for at least 5 minutes. So it's, you know, you go to Paris and you come back and you're like, I'm going to start a magazine, because that's notoriously such a good career move. So why did you want to, like, especially a magazine about the city? Like, talk to us a little bit about the birth of T.O. magazine and why you wanted to do that.
You mean, why didn't I go to Hollywood and be a screenwriter and be incredibly rich like all the writers who worked for me back then? I don't know, I just loved magazines, and it's sad, like, magazines aren't what they are now, I don't think. But, I mean, you and I were in the magazine business. It was like the thing. I grew up reading Esquire magazine and the New Yorker, and I just always had this, I would go to the dentist's office early so I could read all the magazines. So I don't know. I actually like going to the dentist, you know. So I don't know. I just there was always something I wanted to do. And the great thing about being a magazine editor is you're jack of all trades, master of none. But you get an article and then suddenly you have to learn all about dance or sushi or whatever. I mean, so I loved it. And it's the exact opposite of being a writer, because when you're an editor, you've got all these people and all their lives, and when you're doing this, you're just sitting alone for thousands of hours. You know, so it's kind of both sides of my introvert and extrovert personality. I
Yeah,
think,
you get to be with all the writers and boss them around.
Yeah.
Was there a particular thing about Toronto, because this is a thread that continues then into your books, that, you know, we don't often think of Toronto as like a super sexy city or a very interesting city, but you seem to always have faith in it as an interesting city. Like, you did a city magazine, and then what did you see in Toronto that interested you?
Well, and it's interesting seeing it as a criminal lawyer, because growing up in a kind of this type of neighborhood and suddenly being exposed to the real poverty in the city and the real crime in the city, it's what people don't realize, I don't think, that this is a city of sanctuary. Like, my family came here in the 1880s, and they brought over thousands of Jews in 1905 who were victims of pogroms. And I've had clients now who are from Vietnam, from Africa, from South America, and they come here. They come here for the safety of the city, and then somehow, you know, we have mosques next to synagogues in the city. It's much more of a miracle than when we take for granted. And but let's be honest, when I was growing up, Toronto was the most boring city. So a while ago, I said to my then about 12-year-old daughter, she's 25 now, I said, Helen, when I was a kid, do you think we had sushi or sliced pizza or you know, outdoor cafes? She said, of course. I said, no, we didn't have any of that. She couldn't imagine Toronto was a sushi-less city. You know?
I'm amazed that you said sliced pizza.
That's right. No, we didn't have pizza slices. But people here will remember. My mother used to take my younger brother on Avenue Road and take the stroller and put him outside the door, you know, the shop, and go in and shop. And my father got mad at me once when I locked the front door of our house. But flash forward 20 years later, and they're living in a condo with 24-hour security. And so you don't get the sushi without the conflict. But conflict's the essence of drama. So that's why I think Toronto is a really, really, and I think it would have been not as interesting a city to write about a long time ago. And now we've got our very own assassin in the book, you see.
Yeah, wow. So who were your influences when you started to write? Who did you look at and think, God, if I could be like that?
Well, you know, I get asked that question a lot. I was thinking about this the other day. Do you remember there was a book called The Taking of Felon 123? So that was that kind of thriller book that I was reading. And I remember there was a small chapter of this one character, and he worked in the subway, and it started with he had like heartburn. I didn't even know what heartburn was. And then he ends up getting killed, and the last line was, oh, and then like his heartburn bubbled up. And I thought, yeah, you start with an idea and then you end with the idea. I thought, I could do that. And if you look at my writing, that's kind of what I do. But when I finally sold the novel, to my agent in New York, I said, to me, the three great thrillers were The Day of the Jackal, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and The Eye of the Needle. And she went, ah! I said, what's wrong? She said, I just wrote an article saying The Day of the Jackal, The Eye of the Needle, and The Little Drummer Girl with three great novels. So that's how I got an agent.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're talking about when you sold Old City Hall.
Old City Hall. And really, I mean, this is a very different book because this is a much more action book. It's more of a thriller than a mystery. But I guess I was kind of influenced by both of them in a way.
Yeah. So that's a lofty ambition. You know, I want to write like, you know, Le Carré or Ludlum or something like that. But you have to.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
what's the point of doing
you
this?
You have to psych yourself up,
Yeah.
or you would never write anything. So, was your ambition ever hard for you to admit to, or was it something you kept under wraps until it was done? Or, you know, I just saw, I don't know if you all watch award shows, but Timothy Chalamet at the SAG Awards the other night said, "I want to be one of the greats," and I was like, okay, good for you for saying it out loud, because I just don't think. So, did you ever let yourself say, like, I want to be one of the greats?
Very, very few people knew I was writing the books. But Kathy McDonald, one of my friends, who's still my best friend, she'll be at my launch tomorrow, knew. I didn't, I really was kind of like this, I mean, my family knew I was doing this, but and maybe it's partly inspired by my brother. Last year, when I spoke about my brother, I said that he always taught me, not through words, but through action, that it doesn't have to be somebody else. It can be you. So, like, he would teach these actors, he said, like, you can be the star of the show. The star of the new Toronto Law and Order was one of his top students. So, like, when his first book got published, I saw my brother's name on it. It's like, yeah, like, it can be you. It doesn't have to be someone else. And I like to say to people, you know, whether it's being a great chef or a great film critic or great librarian, it doesn't matter. It's just, if it's not so much, I hope it's not so much ego. It's just, if you're going to do something, why don't you want to do it as well as you can possibly do it? And it's extremely rewarding and shocking to see all you people come out here tonight. Thank you very much.
So Old City Hall comes out, and it's a hit.
Yeah.
So what does that feel like?
It was a bit surreal. I mean, every day I was getting a phone call saying, you know, we just sold the book in Poland, we just sold the book in Italy. But I also learned a long time ago, like, I still play hockey Monday night with my friends. My best friends are still my high school friends. Like, keep your feet on the ground and don't believe your own press, and just go back to work. So it was wonderful, but it was also a bit almost invasive. Like, here I'd been 20 years just by myself, wake up 5 in the morning, writing these, and suddenly all these people were interested. So it also put a lot of pressure on me, because I'm not complaining at all, but pressure that you wanted to do more. You know, the funny thing is, you spend all this time thinking, I just want to see my book on the shelf in a bookstore. So, like, you go to a bookstore, you buy your own book, like, wow, this is so cool, you know? And then after about 3 months, you see, wait, Ian Rankin's got a whole shelf. I've only got one book. And so I've actually mentored a few writers, and they all say, Robert, I just want to get one book done. And then they get their book published. About 6 months later, they're saying, yeah, but I want to do another one.
Just got to get an yeah. My husband and I used to go to the bookstore and put his books on the tables and turn all the spines out and stuff like that. We would put it up by the cash. We were shameless.
You all know her, Johanna's husband, Ian Brown, is a spectacular writer for the Globe, and the novelist and writer, yeah.
He owes it all to me for putting his books by the cash
That's right.
register.
That's right.
So you say 5 o'clock in the morning. So you're a lawyer, and you have a full career, and you're raising kids. When are you writing?
Everyone asks me that. It's just kind of, when are you writing? It's kind of
I
chaotic.
have all day to write. I'm not a lawyer.
But you can always find an hour or two in a day. And I mean, you really can, and the thing about writing, it's like exercise. You really have to keep going. So you can always find at least an hour or two in a day. And as actually David said, if you're taking the shower and you're not thinking about a character or how you're going to figure something out or dialogue, then you're not writing. So it's kind of like this tune that's running in the back of your head. And you think you just have to be bullheaded and determined, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't really, a lot of people have careers and then they do other things, you know. And then every once in a while I'll just go somewhere or rent a place and I'll just go and be totally isolated for a few weeks and lie on the ground with a towel over my head, try to figure out the plot. I do, actually.
How does the towel help?
Well, because it makes me just like do nothing, you know. Like, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is your process? Like, where do you start? Do you start with an event? Do you start with a character? Do you know your ending before you start? Like, talk us through your process a little bit.
I write the first chapter. That's what I do. I just think of a scene, and now in this book, because it's a prequel, I had written about 30 first chapters, and none of them worked. It was so frustrating. And then when I got the idea that it was Ari Greene's book, I came up with the opening line, which, if only he hadn't taken, if only he hadn't taken this silly assignment, Detective Ari Greene thought, I'm not sure if I even said detective, he said he could be back home on a long weekend, going to the cottage with his girlfriend Meredith, and getting in their canoe and going to their private beach. So once I kind of put him there, then the first chapter kind of opened up. So what I'll do when I want to write another book, I'll write 5 or 6 opening chapters, and I'll sit down with my agent and the editors and say, like, which one works. I've already written a few first chapters for the next book. So that's kind of how I work. I don't really know how they're going to end, but I don't want to spoil this book for you, but I can tell you, spoiler alert, that Mulroney, Mitterrand, Reagan, Thatcher, they actually were not killed in May of 1988. You know? And actually it's interesting because now you go back and you read Day of the Jackal like 10 times, and you read all about Frederick Forsyth, and he wrote The Day of the Jackal. He was an international journalist, one of these kind of tough Brits, and he sat down and wrote the book in about 2 months. And nobody wanted to buy the book because The Day of the Jackal is about the assassination attempt on Charles de Gaulle. And all these editors said, well, everyone knows that de Gaulle wasn't killed, so no one's going to read the book. So
Yes, it's interesting. In the new Day of the Jackal miniseries,
right.
The German politician gets really, really killed.
Yeah, they did some switches there.
So when you're pacing this book, because you mentioned in your author's note that there are certain things that might not be entirely factual, like maybe the summit didn't take place during the 4th of July. So, but as a journalist, even in your note, I can feel that you struggle with that decision, right? That even, I can tell that it kind of kills you a little bit to not put that in thing. So talk about that hinge that you have to be on to story versus factual accuracy.
Well, actually, I'm going to encourage people when I look at the book to read what I wrote about that. I don't want to spoil it, but the story is more important than the facts. And I love, someone once said, the great thing about fiction is that you can tell the truth, whereas nonfiction, you're stuck with facts. Now, that sounds completely stupid and counterintuitive, but if you want to know what England was like in the Industrial Revolution, what would you read?
Yeah, of course.
Dickens.
Yeah.
If you want to know what California was like in the Dust Bowl, you'd read Steinbeck. If you wanted to know what New York was like in the 1990s, you'd read Thomas Wolfe. So that's, I think, the great, great joy of fiction, because fiction really can tell the underlying truth of things. So Gorbachev wasn't really there in 1988. Well, it's too good a story if Gorbachev is there. So
Yeah.
he's there in my book.
It would have been better if he'd been there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so then at what point do you put in, like, there's a couple of chapters that are just comic relief. I'm thinking about the chapter in Roots, for example.
Right.
Where you just know that you have to, like, even though it's a countdown and we're ticking away, you just want to, like, let yourself have some fun. How do you know when that's necessary and when it's one of the little darlings that you would tell your students to kill?
Well, that's actually something where working with a really good editor really makes a difference, because there were about 4 or 5 chapters like that Roots chapter, and we ended up taking many of them out. But it can't just be bang, 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 bang all the time. So, like, there's a chapter where Ari goes back to see his father, and it was really, really fun to write that chapter because Ari's relationship with his father is a key to the whole series. And of course, his father says something that becomes significant in the book. I won't tell you what it is. So I think pacing is such a crucial thing. And what I do is, for every chapter, you ask me about my process, I write 3 things at the top of the chapter. I wrote the character, I write where's the location, and I write what happened in this chapter. And I sometimes just print them all out and I lay them all out on the floor. And I'm a lawyer, so I'll put them in a binder and I'll switch them around, or I'll do a big chart, which should be where. Because you have to have a sense of, and I've never taken the easy route and just had one character go through the whole book. It would be so much nicer and easier. But I always have 4 or 5 different characters, and I have these little rules in my head, like Ari Greene can't disappear for more than 4 chapters. You know, when you're watching a Netflix show and you suddenly think, what happened to that person? And boom, they're in the next segment. You know that from film. I mean, so it's a bit like music. My middle son's a musical director, and we talk about that, how it's kind of like the rhythm of a book. And I don't know quite how, but you kind of know when you've got it right. When you're rereading it for the 400th time and finding all these word reps you thought you got rid of.
It flows.
Yeah.
How many people have read other Ari Greene novels? Just curious. Okay.
Oh, thanks.
That's pretty good. So when did you know that Ari was a great character? And what do you think makes him a great character?
I come from a Jewish family that came here in the 1890s, and then the other side, they came here after World War I. I am not the child of Holocaust survivors, but I went to Bathurst Heights, which many of you probably know, and most of my friends, my partner, most of the people I grew up with, their parents were Holocaust survivors. And they have an extra gear that I don't have. They don't have grandparents, they don't have uncles or aunts, and in many ways they've had to parent their own parents. And so many people have written to me saying, you're talking about my parents, Jewish or not Jewish, I mean, a lot of, and they said they couldn't have written it because it was too close. And I think it's that thing of being the observer, about being one step away. So I don't know, Ari just kind of popped into my brain one day, and I think why people like him, there's 2 things. First of all, and I'm very proud of this, someone said to me once, he's very quiet. It's really hard to write a quiet character. It's very easy to write these big, overly dramatic characters. And secondly, he's not what we used to call a yuppie. He's not thinking, it's Friday night, am I going to go to the ski club, or am I going to go to this fancy restaurant? He knows he has this responsibility to his father, and he's not resentful of it. It's just part of his life. And then some of you have read the series, find out at some point he finds out he has a 20-year-old daughter, so that makes his life more complex. And he was getting a bit too perfect, so he's definitely had some not perfect things. I don't want to spoil it for those of you who haven't read the book. So I don't know. I'll say one thing, which is that even though in the books he was having an affair with a married woman, I found a lot of married women really, really liked him. So now you can draw your own conclusions.
Yeah, how
on
do
that.
their married husbands feel about him is the
Right,
question.
That's right.
So, you know, you're a criminal lawyer, you're a criminal defense lawyer. In your bio, it says you've defended everyone from shoplifters to murderers. Are there any standout cases that you can talk about?
Well, one of the things I don't do, these are not like a roman à clef, my books. Like I see people in crisis. And, Somerset Maugham was a doctor for 5 years before he became a writer. And he said he learned everything he needed to know about the human condition and human personality by being a doctor. And I think what I really get from being a lawyer is seeing people in crisis and seeing them work their way through. So I kind of forgot your question.
Oh,
but I
just
like
as
that
if there was
answer.
any particular case that you really are like, I can't believe that this was my case. I just thought you could anecdote us.
There'll be too many.
Too many? Okay. So, you say people in crisis. So what do you think it's taught you about human nature? And how do you think you apply that in your books?
Well, I think that's the essence of film, literature. You want to see the arc, you're a film critic, you want to see the arc of people's lives. And whether it's the main character or whether it's even a minor character, like you mentioned, that Roots, it's a one-chapter thing, but
Yeah,
you get a sense of who he is.
Someone goes to buy a sweatshirt, and we live inside the head very briefly of the
Right.
clerk at Roots, and it's very funny.
Yeah, well, so it's just kind of figuring out who that person was and how they talk and how they joke. And so when any of you are arrested and you hire me, I want to let you know the first hour you can't tell me how you're so innocent. And I spend an hour with people finding about their first wife, their second husband, their brother they can't stand, their parents they haven't talked to for 5 years, and the 5 jobs they've had. And they have to kind of come to the realization that everything in their life has led to them being in a lawyer's office on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Just like everything in all of our lives has led to you and me sitting here right now. And that's, I think, the creation of character. I think the creation of character is how did that, David Mamet said, like, you chose to put every character where you put them. And so I think if you kind of get a sense of how people end up somewhere, I mean, all of us can think of people we grew up with who we thought were going to have such wonderful lives and have turned out horribly, or the opposite. And it takes time to kind of think that through. And so I see people in the moment of crisis where they have to realize how they got to be there and then what changes they have to make so they don't come back to my office on a sunny Sunday afternoon.
Right. So, in a thriller, everyone's capable of anything, right?
Right.
You have to sort of believe that about people, that they're capable of anything, and also that they're kind of led by self-interest. How do you not become cynical? I mean, do you believe that's true? And if so, how do you not become cynical?
I said a while ago to a judge, there's 2 things that are really important, is never believe anything everyone says and never disbelieve anything anyone says. And the biggest mistake you can make in the justice system is to become cynical. And I think in many ways that's a great, great, great question. Because in many ways I think that's the same thing with writing. Because when you read a book where the characters are simplistic, and I don't want to spoil anything about the book, but it's very easy to say, oh, she's a mysterious assassin. But as you can see, she's quite complex. And I can tell you, when you're reading the book, there's going to be a point where you're probably going to be rooting for her, right? So, and I think, I do a deep dive when I get interested in something. So Ken Follett said of his first book, The Eye of the Needle, he said, no one ever told me that you shouldn't make the bad guy so interesting. And I think that's what really makes it more complex. You don't want black and white characters, Mr. Good and Mr. Bad. I'm not writing a comic book.
I do want to ask you about confidence, though, because here we are in a very nice and shiny library. You're a lawyer, and you're writing about international assassins. And how do you take that leap of faith of I'm going to create a credible international assassin?
Well, let's not be so Canadian, really. Why is it, you talked about the Day of Jackal, it's always these exotic locations in Spain, in Lithuania, Robert Ludlum's books are always all over the world. Like, we're a spectacular country. Why can't we have we can have our own assassin,
Yeah.
And I don't want to brag, but there's so many cozy mysteries. I've written Murdoch mysteries. They're wonderful, but I can't think of many other Canadian really high action thrillers. So I kind of got addicted to doing it. I didn't really expect this. This is, I guess, would be like meeting an old girlfriend and suddenly you're back together again. But it's like, this is my old girlfriend, and
It worked out this time.
Yeah, so far. Well,
Yeah.
I just got interviewed in Calgary, and they asked me when I'm going to go out there. I said, well, the Stampede would be a really good place for an assassination attempt or something.
Yes.
I mean, Ari, between 1988 and 2009, when the first book came out, he's got many years to do some really, really exciting things.
Again, I don't want to spoil the book for people,
Yeah.
but the assassin did not train to be an assassin in Canada. Let's be fair.
Well, we're going to... But, I have to say, when you write a mystery, and I love writing mysteries, but you find yourself thinking, oh my God, there's another two people sitting at a coffee shop and having a conversation. Whereas this book, it was just so much fun to, I've actually never jumped out of a helicopter, but Ari Greene has.
Right.
So as I was writing it, I was thinking, can I really do that? And I thought, well, why the hell not?
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, it costs you nothing to write
that's
jumped
right.
out of a helicopter.
Yeah, that's right.
So this ticking clock aspect is so interesting. Obviously for us as readers, it propels us through the book. What does it do for you as a writer to put that on yourself?
I think it forces you, and this is what I learned from the magazine business, and I worked for a year at CBC Radio, it forces you to cut, and to really drill down into really the essence of the story. You asked me if there's something else I learned with the book. I'll go back to that question very quickly. In my other books, I always write from the point of view of the main characters. But in this book, I write like that Roots chapter. There's a few other chapters. There's the officer on the blockade. I write like one chapter from the point of view of a different character. And in the original, I had about 15 different characters, and I had from the point of view of a million different people, it was a jumble. But when you drill down and you, I loved having this time clock to really force the action into that. Which, very quickly, it's the life of a criminal lawyer.
Yeah.
Because I've got a trial on March the 7th, and it's a ticking clock in my brain. I have to do this, I have to do that. That date's not going to go away.
Right.
And I have to be there. I have to be ready that day.
Right.
So,
22 days more.
yeah.
So I'm going to ask you two more questions, then I'm going to open it up to you
Sure.
guys. And they both just went right out of my head.
Well, you're a fantastic interviewer. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. No, so you went back and revisited this book. Now is your chance to be not Canadian and really brag. What do you do better? What have you learned?
From this book?
Just in general, when you look back at your 1988 version or whatever of this, and you say, oh, I look back and I think, oh my God, what are you good at? What do you know that you've figured out or are figuring out?
Well, I think what I learned, it's funny because watching The Jackal, the TV show, I knew exactly what was going to happen when, except they played around with the ending. I will brag a bit, I was kind of amazed at how the plot, not only the plot worked, but the characters worked. And how I interwove the characters and how I forced them into making moral decisions and the consequences of those moral decisions, which is really the essence of real drama. So I kind of realized, reading it again, that I kind of had the it to write a book. The other thing I learned is that it's fun to kind of write a book where I just say, well, sure, I can start in big parade, and sure, someone can jump out of a train, and you know, you can see what I did is I create characters who you really dislike, and then you realize there's more dimension to them. Also, in my last book, which was called What We Buried, I went out of Toronto, and a lot of it was based on this horrible Nazi massacre in Italy in 1944. And taking my fictional characters and putting them in historical settings, because I'm a history nerd, so I really love doing that. And it's really a way to really enrich the stories. I don't think I'm going to go back to just simple courtroom dramas. I loved writing those, but I feel like this adds a lot more depth to the books.
So my last question then is, you know, you sort of started writing out of a need or wanting something bigger, wanting something else, right? Is that the reason you still do it? What keeps you still doing it?
I feel more compelled to write now than I ever have. And Leonard Cohen said when a man or a person turns 70, which I did last year, you kind of realize you have one more chapter to go. And I feel this, I don't want to, Gloria Steinem said recently, she had 2 regrets. She should have traveled more, and she should have written more. And I just want to get better. So, and to my shock, I've met a lot of these very famous writers who I've known, and I think they're very working class. It's a working class job.
Yeah.
And I remember meeting, I won't do a name drop of this writer, and
Name drop.
his name's Jeffrey Deaver, and I said, "How are you doing?" He said, "I just wrote this great chapter this morning," you know. And okay, I'll brag. Ian Rankin gave me this wonderful blurb, and he said, "Oh, Bobby, nobody read my first 7 books," and it just, you have to be just pig-headed and persistent. I think. And listen, it's very gratifying that people respond. You know.
Yeah.
It's kind of shocking,
we're
too.
so glad you keep at it, Bobby Rotenberg.